Right, I've forgotten what clause we're on. Item 11. Okay, item 11 is the report of the hearings panel, which we would normally think would be a simple issue. But what did we decide, Dave?
If I can just sort of speak to it briefly, you'll be aware that the Parks and Reserves bylaw was brought to Council earlier this year and was sent back to the hearings panel to address three areas in a little more detail. Two of the areas concerned wording around a parking issue where the word ordinarily was used. That clause has been rewritten as in on page 221, subsection 4.1. It's rewritten there quite clearly without the word ordinarily that covers that issue off. The issue of drones, the hearings panel, we really considered that the submitter that put forward issues to the panel, that the drones fitted comfortably within the descriptive of other devices that are capable, and we actually just recommended that a note be added to the bylaw that the reading that the general intent of this clause was to address noise and nuisance issues concerning privacy and aviation safety, and rules are covered by separate legislation. So those two items I believe we've covered off on. The third item that the bylaw panel was charged with looking at considered the proposal to insert a clause regarding the scattering of ashes. In the original hearing we had 4 submitters. 2 of those came back again in the second hearing. We had MKT and Adrian Tipatu on behalf of the Littleton Mount Herbert Community Board. I'd just like to perhaps make a general comment that really bylaws are, in my view, are created in response to issues in the community or a need to regulate a particular activity. I'll just draw your attention to comments that were made in the deliberations. MKT acknowledged that it's not practicable to prevent people from scattering ashes in public places. The Littleton Mount Herbert Community Board reiterated the board's position that they didn't want to prevent people scattering ashes, but it's also quite pertinent to note that MKT were quite keen on encouraging the education of the public as to the cultural impact this activity has on Maori and Waitapu, and Littleton Mount Herbert stated that they preferred the restriction of scattering of ashes and burial of placenta to designated areas or urupa. So we have that issue to deal with. I believe a bylaw has to be enforceable, and in my opinion it's unlikely that any bylaw will prevent people with a desire to scatter ashes of a loved one in a particular area that has significance to that family or the deceased. Enforceability is quite an issue for our staff. They are quite stretched with monitoring and enforcing various bylaws, and particularly resource consent conditions. So for me to sort of this is me personally, to have a clause in the bylaw that specifically prevents the scattering ashes was quite difficult. And I sat on the panel with a member of a community board in Glen Livingston. It was a split decision, and we recommended in the end that we would recommend that this bylaw come back to the council, and we omit the scattering of ashes portions from the bylaw at the moment, and then go back out to the community if the council decided it was advisable to seek further consultation on the issue of scattering of ashes to come to an acceptable position with our partners, MKT and members of the community. And I think it's quite strongly noted in the submissions that we did receive that MKT really were seeking to educate the public into the cultural impact that this activity may have on Māori and Waitapu, and the same sort of thing came out from the Littleton Mount Herbert Community Board. So I'm happy to recommend the hearings panel, move the recommendations from the hearings panel, and particularly that if we go back to our community and open a wider consultation on the acceptability of scattering of ashes and whether it should be a general prohibition or we come up with some other resolution to deal with the issue.
So I'd probably like to, I'm not sure what the process is here, perhaps foreshadow an amendment. Well, my amendment would be quite the converse of what's proposed. So whether it can be moved as an amendment or not, I don't know, and I can explain my reasons why. But my suggestion would be that we don't accept the recommendation of the hearings panel today, and that we refer this matter to the full council for a decision. So I'm first foreshadowing a further motion.
Speak to it, or?
Yes, certainly. The reason I can't support the motion as it's put today is that I'm not happy for this bylaw to be approved with this matter of clearly some significant cultural consideration, and also clearly there are differing views that haven't fully been heard as yet. I'm not happy to approve this bylaw with this significant matter still unresolved. I think it needs to be resolved before we can approve the bylaw. To approve the bylaw and then signal that we're going to possibly look at changing that very soon after it's been approved would seem to be quite absurd. I think we need to do the work once and do it well before we do the approval. So the issue for me really is that there are cultural considerations around this, which obviously the hearings panel has heard in the first round of submissions, and then obviously once it was referred back to them as well. And the two further submissions, or the two repeat submissions that were heard, clearly both suggested that this issue of scattering of ashes is something of cultural importance and cultural significance. And I think clearly one of the aspects that we need to look at here is the need for education around the cultural effects of this particular activity. So yeah, clearly there's further work that needs to be done. I note that there was a difference of opinion on the hearings panel around this. It certainly wasn't unanimous. If we were to simply refer the matter back to the hearings panel, it's highly likely that the hearings panel have already formed a view on this, which may then result in the same response again. I think it's better if this comes back to the full council so that awareness of the issue can be raised, so that we get a chance to debate it properly, and then approve the bylaw once everything that's been considered has been decided, rather than approving it now and then coming back to do more work on it as a result of this issue. So yeah, I'll be opposing the resolution, but certainly signal the need to deal with this differently by way of that further resolution that I've signalled.
Yes, thank you, and I'll be along similar lines to Councillor Turner. Just to speak to my own arrogance for a minute, if the panel had listened to me, we wouldn't have been in this shuttling backwards and forwards with this because MKT is our partner. They're our local expression of our treaty partner. And you can see in 7.2 up there, they're not just another stakeholder. And I think that that's a fundamental part that sits behind this whole bylaw here. Ian Cranwell was actually quite real about the whole thing, and and reasonable, and he was simply saying that they need, he was asked that we hear MKT. So I do support what Andrew is saying, and I think we need to go back, but it's a pity we've had to do this shuttling.
That's all said that I was going to say, but I think it's time to actually walk the talk with our partner, and they have, we need to be really sensitive to the cultural impact here of what they've pointed out in their submission. So I fully support this coming back to the council to be discussed and to work with MKT more thoroughly and gain a better understanding of where they're coming from and what they want. So I'll be supporting the foreshadowed amendment.
I just want to talk in support of Dave and his panel. I mean, they've gone through the submission process. I've heard the things. They've actually identified the fact that they will engage with MKT and other interested parties to find the acceptable resolution. So I'm sort of confused that we go down a different track, because I thought 7.2 actually highlights there's going to be further engagement on that particular issue.
Can I just...
Sorry, I've expressed a consistent view all along.
No, you said before that
Yeah, I did, and you did.
didn't take your advice.
That's right.
That's the democratic process.
Cool. On a completely different matter, which you'll be happy to have a question on. I just want to know that this bylaw stops people parking on Cranmer Square legally. So, because when I lodged complaints around the widespread use of Cranmer Square for car parking, I was advised that we have a gap in our bylaws that currently allow people to be able to do it. And I just don't think it's appropriate. We're taking out a lot of trees from these sorts of places because of damage. Now, I don't know if it's directly related to the car parking, but it would be sensible to assume that it does have an impact, and I personally think we need provision. So I've read through it. It would seem to me that it does mean that people can't take vehicles on these reserves, but I just want to have that clarified.
The wording that we changed, we had the concern was around the definition of the word ordinarily. So we've taken that out and rewritten the clause, and I think it's quite explicit now, 9.1a and b, that how much more explicit do we need to go than that?
You know. Right. Okay.
Motion,
Do I
if
get
that's
the right
okay.
of reply?
Probably. Yes, you do, Dave.
Look, I'd just like to emphasise the fact that this panel clearly identified that the scattering of ashes was an important issue for the community. In no way did we think that we would just not include this. The whole intent of the panel's resolution at the end was to suggest to council that we needed a wider consultation on the matter to come up with a solution that was going to be acceptable to all parties. I acknowledge that MKT is a significant partner in the city. The only difference between what is proposed here and the amendment is perhaps the inconvenience of having to go back and review one aspect of a bylaw at a later date. The same result is going to eventuate, and it's whether we have a need to actually be able to enforce some of the things that we are changing and amending in the bylaw now, or do we wait for the whole lot to sit around for another 6 months or more before we end up with this consultation? That is the matter. It's not a question of whether MKT are right or wrong, or whether the scattering of ashes should or shouldn't be allowed. It's a question of, do we do this process by stalling the whole bylaw until we've got the whole lot sorted, or do we just accept that we've got 99% of it sorted now, get on with it, pass that, and go back and deal with the scattering of ashes? That's the solution, the issue, and I believe the resolution and the amendment ultimately achieve the same goal. It's just a question of really whether we are prepared to go back and review a bylaw in a few months' time. The same outcome's going to happen. It's just the process of how you get there.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to put the motion, which is before you here. Okay, you're all aware of what you're voting on. Can I put that? Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Can I have a show of hands, please? 1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed? No. One. Can you just put your hand up? Sorry, Andrew. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, that's lost. So, what's that? I'm not going to vote, otherwise it just gets messy. Well, either way, no, I'm going to abstain, because otherwise it's going to get incredibly messy. So I'm going to put Andrew wants to move something else.
Okay, so the new motion would be to reject the report of the hearings panel and refer the matter to the full council for resolution of the outstanding issues.
Right, okay, thank you. Yeah. Dave, either which way I vote, it makes no odds. Either which way I vote, it makes no odds. If it's an equality, it's not carried. Okay, so this is moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Pauline, to reject the report of the hearings and refer to the council for a decision. On the whole thing, or just on... Oh, we have to do the whole thing, don't we, Ian? Right, sorry. Right. So the only thing... Yeah. Yep, okay. So the advice is that this is the way in which you have to handle it. Okay. Right. Well, I think we've had quite a lot of debate on it. Can I put that, or does somebody want to speak? If not, I'll put it. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Can I have a show of hands? Those in favour? It might be the same. Andrew, are you voting in favour of yours?
I'm voting in favour.
Do you want to put your hand up then? Okay. I'm putting Andrew's amendment, seconded by Pauline. Okay, so if you're in favour of it, could you just put your hand up? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you're opposed to it, could you put your hand up? Right, I'll declare that carried. Otherwise, we'll be here all day. Right, okay. No, it's carried. It's carried. Just do that. Don't ask me. It's carried, right? Okay. Right. Well, can we move on from that then?